Thank you, Brian. And thank you to the folks who've organized this conference, and thank you all for being here. My remarks, I think, might be entitled Celtic Spirituality and the Sabbath. And it might be the response to the question that was held in the previous session of those who might say that they're spiritual, not religious, the so-called nuns, but people who might be attracted to spirituality or mysticism. And so I'd like to describe three characteristics of Celtic spirituality and then show how they might relate to the Sabbath or the Lord's Day. And the first characteristic is a response to the question, where is God? And the answer of Celtic spirituality is everywhere. John Macquarie, the great Anglican theologian, said that the defining characteristic of Celtic spirituality is a sense of the immanence of God. That would be in distinction to the transcendence of God, that God is out there. Immanence saying God is in here. Matter of fact, God is everywhere in every created thing. And so sometimes people might say, well, isn't that pantheism? No, pantheism is that God is these things. Rather, a better word would be panentheism. God is in these things. And then the second aspect of Celtic spirituality might be their understanding of revelation and saying, yes, God reveals the message through the Word, the book, the Scriptures, but that God, secondly, God reveals the message through what might they call the book of nature in this created world. And in the book of Genesis, the creation, after each day of creation, this beautiful nature, God saw that it was good. So God is in nature, and we can experience God in nature. The mystic of the 13th century, Meister Eckhart in Germany, raised the question of how do you see God? And pointed out that God is not an object or a thing. And there's no vantage place where we could kind of stand and look at God the way we look at other things. Also, God has no parts. God is one. So how do you see God? Well, he said, the way you see God, God has to see through your eyes. So he has this beautiful sentence, my eyes are God's eyes and God's eyes are my eyes. So that God, the only way you could see God is if God is in your eyes seeing God. And of course, God is in everyone. And so we are also all created in the image of God. And so you are your expression of God in the world. Rabbi Moshe is a Rabbi Moshe expression of God in the world. Reverend Tom Ryan is a Tom Ryan expression of God in the world. And each of us is an expression of God in the world. And so if I look through my eyes and see you, God looking through my eyes, I see you as an expression of God in the world. And then the third dimension of Celtic spirituality I'd like to mention is the idea of thin places. I've been to the Isle of Iona several times, and Iona is described as a thin place. And what do they mean by thin place? It means that the distance between what we might experience as ordinary earthly reality and this divine reality or the presence of God, that the distance is a little bit less than what we normally experience. So they call it a thin place. It's just a thin barrier between the earthly and the divine. And the interesting thing, when you get off the boat and get into the Isle of Iona, something takes over. Now, it could be my imagination, but I definitely felt I was in a very, very holy place. So now to relate this to the Sabbath. In Sabbath time, we step away from the ordinary. And when we go into worship on Sabbath time, for me, it is an experience of Moses encountering the burning bush. And I think of the sanctuary where we gather together in the church as a thin place, but it's also a thin time. And we're going to be standing on holy ground. And like Moses, we want even to take our shoes off. So in your imagination, when you go to worship, you can sense that this is the burning bush, and you are in a very thin place in a thin time. You take metaphorically, you take your shoes off and you settle in. And you begin even to look at the place. And even if the church or synagogue or wherever you might be doesn't seem maybe physically as beautiful as it might be in your imagination, this is a beautiful place. And then the liturgy is speaking to us. We're nourished, in the Christian liturgy, we're nourished by the word that we hear spoken, both from the Jewish scriptures and from the Christian scriptures. We're nourished by that word, and we're nourished also by the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist. And we need to step away at least once a week to gather with our brothers and sisters to experience the thin place and the thin time together. And then nourished by this word and by this sacrament, we go out to live out Matthew 25, where Jesus says, I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty, you gave me drink, I was naked and you clothed me, I was sick or in prison and you visited me. And we have been nourished and strengthened by our liturgy together in this thin place to go out to serve our brothers and sisters in the world. And we think of the good parable of the Good Samaritan and the person laying by the side of the road. So who is our neighbor, is the question Jesus said. Who was the neighbor? Well, it was the one who cared for the person in need. And so Celtic spirituality and the Sabbath, I think, can go very well together. And I invite all of those who may say that they're spiritual but not religious to realize that by coming into this Sabbath thin place, they might be nourished to really get in touch with a very deep spirituality and find great meaning in their lives and great strength for living in our world. Thank you very much.